Hello and a very warm welcome. You're watching Gravitas. My name is Molly Gambhir. Let's get started. For weeks now, the Ukraine crisis has dominated global headlines. With the window for diplomacy now fast shrinking, at this point, any wrong move could mean an escalation in tensions, and Europe could be plunged into war. Russia is deploying more than 30,000 troops to Belarus, the biggest military deployment in the country since the Cold War. Russian S-400 missile systems have arrived in Belarus. Vladimir Putin clearly is not backing down. Joe Biden is not backing down either. All this while diplomacy, talks and visits by leaders continue in order to try and diffuse the tensions. On Gravitas tonight, we get you up to speed with the latest on the Ukraine crisis. I'm Molly Gambhir. Also on the show for you tonight, UAE tackles the fourth drone attack in less than 2 weeks as tensions with Yemeni rebels intensify. U.S. Special Operations Forces carry out counter-terrorism raids in northwest Syria against suspected Al-Qaeda terrorists. The chief of the Islamic State has been killed in that successful U.S. counter-terror raid. We tell you more. There's trouble that's mounting for UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson. His own party members shoot off letters of no confidence against the leader. We tell you what's brewing. Is wine bad for you? A new report says so. We get you a special report. First, as always, Gravitas Global Headlines.
In a veiled reference to China, the Indian Army Chief General M.M. Narawane says that nations are challenging globally accepted norms and the rules-based order through opportunist actions to alter the status quo, keeping the threshold below all-out war. Israel's defense minister Benny Gantz visits the U.S. Navy Fleet's headquarters in Bahrain as part of an unannounced trip amid heightened Gulf tensions following drone and missile attacks on the United Arab Emirates. The Association for Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, has barred Myanmar's military-appointed foreign minister from attending an upcoming meeting. This after the UNSC called for an end to all forms of violence in Myanmar, along with release of detained leader Aung San Suu Kyi. At least 20 people were killed and more than 74 others hospitalized in Buenos Aires in Argentina after consuming cocaine, which was apparently mixed with a toxic substance. Authorities have called the same a case of possible poisoning. 26 people died after lightning struck a high-tension power cable on the outskirts of the Congolese capital, Kinshasa, causing it to snap and fall on houses and a market. New Zealand announces a phased reopening of its borders, with vaccinated New Zealanders in Australia allowed to travel home from February 27th without requiring to isolate. New Zealand had closed its borders for nearly 2 years to curb COVID cases. A major winter storm brought a mix of freezing rain and snow to central United States. Schools were closed down while airlines canceled thousands of flights. Officials urged people to stay indoors. NASA reveals plans to destroy the International Space Station in January 2031 by sending it plummeting to a spacecraft cemetery in the most remote part of the South Pacific Ocean. The space station has now been operational since November 2000. International Olympic Committee President Thomas Bach will meet with Chinese tennis player Peng Shuai inside the closed loop of the Beijing Winter Olympics. Bach said that he would support the former doubles world number one if she asks for an investigation into her sexual harassment allegations against former Chinese Vice Premier Zhang Gaoli. Senegal have reached the Africa Cup of Nations final after a hard-fought 3-1 victory over Burkina Faso. Liverpool star Sadio Mane was on target as the Lions scored thrice in the last 20 minutes to book their place in a second straight final. Senegal will now face either Egypt or hosts Cameroon in search of their maiden AFCON title.
Diplomacy and deterrence. That is America's strategy to contain Russia. We are talking about sanctions, soldiers, and military aid. Joe Biden is basically raising the stakes for Vladimir Putin, but the problem is Putin is not backing down. These satellite images should give you an idea. They show Belarus, Crimea, and parts of Western Russia. Around 100,000 soldiers are camping here. You can see tents, firing ranges, tanks and missiles. Not only is Russia refusing to de-escalate, it is actually expanding the build-up. Many experts are talking about Belarus as a staging ground. And strategically, it makes sense. If Putin decides to invade, he can move in from two fronts via Belarus in the north and via Western Russia in the east. Moscow is already thinking along these lines. Its S-400 missiles have started arriving in Belarus as part of a wider joint military drill. They are calling it combat cohesion training. Tanks, artillery guns and missiles will be part of these exercises. Russia's defense minister is personally overseeing the preparations in Belarus. In Brussels, the NATO is keeping a close watch.
Over the last days, we have seen a significant movement of Russian military forces into Belarus. This is the biggest Russian deployment there since the Cold War. With an expected 30,000 combat troops, Spetsnaz Special Operation Forces, fighter jets including Su-35, Iskander dual-capable missiles and S-400 air defense systems. So we speak about a wide range of modern military capabilities.
Those are the ground deployments. In the skies, Russian planes are also performing drills. The Tu-95 bombers flew over the Atlantic northeast. Now, this plane is a Russian warhorse. Plus, it is nuclear capable. Moscow claims the drills happened in neutral skies, but Britain and Norway disagree. Both countries deployed fighter jets to intercept the Russian bombers. They were eventually escorted back into Russian airspace. So clearly, Putin is not backing down. In fact, he is going on the offensive. So Joe Biden is doing the same. He is sending 3,000 US soldiers to Europe, 2,000 of them to Germany and Poland, 1,000 to Romania. France is also planning to deploy soldiers to Romania. Needless to say, Russia is livid. They have called these troop movements destructive and unjustified. Does this mean diplomacy has failed? Not yet. High-level phone calls, visits by heads of state, all of this is happening on the sidelines. On Wednesday, the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson spoke to the Russian president. The backstory is quite interesting. It was originally supposed to happen on Monday, but Boris Johnson had to appear in Parliament, so he cancelled it. Here's how Moscow reacted to that. Russia and President Putin are open to communicating with everyone, even to someone who is utterly confused. He is prepared to provide exhaustive explanations. Russia basically called Boris Johnson utterly confused. Nonetheless, the call did happen on Wednesday. Boris Johnson told Putin that attacking Ukraine would be a tragic miscalculation. Putin said the entire thing was NATO's fault. He said their response to his security demands was not adequate. Now, this phone call comes after Boris Johnson's visit to Kiev. That trip was all about PR, a public show of support for Ukraine. In fact, many NATO leaders are now lining up to visit Kiev. Poland's Prime Minister visited on Tuesday, the Dutch Prime Minister visited on Wednesday, and today, Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is in Kiev. He has visited with a proposal. Erdogan wants to shift the Russia-Ukraine peace talks to Turkey. Now, these talks cover the war in eastern Ukraine, where Russia is backing insurgents. Until now, those talks were held in Minsk, but with Belarus openly joining the Russian camp, a change of scene may not be a bad idea. Ukraine is up for it if Russia agrees.
We would be happy to shift the venue to Istanbul. The Ukrainian side is ready for talks in Istanbul as well as in Geneva or any other place that is neutral and most importantly independent from one of the sides, namely the Russian Federation.
Another country is playing peacemaker, that's Germany. The Chancellor Olaf Scholz will visit Washington next week. He will also travel to Russia and meet the Russian president. Germany has been accused of being a fence-sitter during this crisis, of being too passive. Olaf Scholz wants to counter that narrative. Having said that, Berlin is yet to provide military aid to Ukraine. Most NATO allies have. Germany has only offered helmets so far. As of now, Russia's new military drills are the immediate concern. The number of troops, the type of weaponry, all of it will worry the West. Joe Biden has responded with some deployments of his own. He is also coordinating with his allies in Europe. On Tuesday, he spoke to the French President Emmanuel Macron. Both leaders agreed to protect Ukraine's sovereignty. So you have talks on one side, a massive military buildup on the other. It is a question of who blinks first. In such tense standoffs, it does not take much for things to escalate. One miscalculation, one wrong decision, and Europe could be plunged into war. And starting next week, WION's executive editor Palki Sharma Upadhyay will be tracking this standoff from the Ukrainian capital Kiev. Make sure to join us from Monday to Friday for the special Gravitas edition direct from Ukraine. From tensions between Russia and Ukraine, we turn to another theater of conflict. The ongoing Yemen war in West Asia is intensifying. The UAE has destroyed 3 more drones that entered its airspace. They were intercepted flying over unpopulated areas and were immediately taken down by the Emirati forces. The UAE's defense ministry has issued a statement. It says, and I'm quoting, MOD announces interception and destruction away from populated areas of 3 hostile drones that penetrated the UAE airspace at dawn today. The MOD confirms it is ready to deal with any threats and is taking all necessary measures to protect the state and its territory. Now, for the record, this was the 4th such drone attack on the UAE in less than 2 weeks, 18 days to be precise, the 4th such attack. The first attack unfolded on the 17th of January. Abu Dhabi, the capital of UAE, was hit. Drones were fired at it by the Houthi rebels. They hit a major oil facility and the Abu Dhabi airport. 3 people were killed, 2 Indians and 1 Pakistani. A week later, on the 24th of January, the second attack unfolded. U.S. forces stationed at Abu Dhabi's Al Dhafra air base shot down 2 ballistic missiles fired by the Houthi rebels. The missiles' fragments fell harmlessly over Abu Dhabi. And then on the 31st of January came the third attack. It unfolded during a visit of the Israeli president. The attack was thwarted in a joint operation by the US military and the Emirati forces. On Wednesday, the fourth attack was thwarted. Interestingly, this time, Yemen's Houthi rebels were not behind it. The attack has been claimed by a little-known group, Aulia Wad al-Haq, an Iraqi group which is against the UAE's policies in Yemen. This is the same group that was behind a January 23rd attack on the Yama Palace in Saudi Arabia's capital, Riyadh. What does this tell you? That the UAE is now being targeted from both its north and south. This is a new threat and possibly explains why the United States is getting involved. America is sending a warship to the UAE along with state-of-the-art fighter jets. What for? To help the UAE defend itself from the Houthis. Which warship is America deploying? The USS Cole, a guided missile destroyer. It will partner with the UAE's Navy to provide early warning intelligence and deter future threats from the Houthis. This decision was announced after a phone call between the U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin and Abu Dhabi's Crown Prince. A Pentagon spokesperson has said that the warship will help the UAE add to its defense capabilities against the growing threats. He also added that the Pentagon has decided to not rule out any additional steps.
We want to add to their ability to help defend themselves and to demonstrate clearly and tangibly our commitment to this important partnership. And so these are two tangible ways in which we believe we can help the Emiratis deal with these very serious threats. And again, we're not going to rule out additional steps.
So there is a lot at play here. Drone attacks are growing by the day, new players are entering the conflict, and America has dragged itself back into someone else's war. The next few days are crucial. We will be tracking the story very closely. 24 hours are left for the Beijing Winter Olympics to start, an event that China expects will whitewash its image and distract the world from its ongoing human rights violations. But the list of countries boycotting that event is only growing. After the US, the UK, Australia and several other countries announced a diplomatic boycott, India has also decided to do the same. Earlier today, India's Ministry of External Affairs announced that Indian diplomats will not be attending the opening or the closing ceremony of this 17-day-long sporting event. This decision is significant. It comes right after China chose a soldier who fought against India in the 2020 Ladakh standoff as one of the torchbearers for the Games. His name is Chief Abao, a regiment commander in the PLA. He apparently suffered a head injury during the clashes in the Galwan Valley, and he is now relaying the Olympic torch in Beijing. This is a clear provocation, and it has not been left unanswered. Earlier today, India's External Affairs Ministry held a press conference. It slammed China for politicizing the Winter Olympics and announced a complete diplomatic boycott to the Games.
It is indeed regrettable that the Chinese side has chosen to politicize an event like the Olympics. I wish to inform that our chargé d'affaires of the Embassy of India in Beijing will not be attending the opening or the closing ceremony of the Beijing 22 Winter Olympics.
And shortly after that announcement, another statement was issued, this time from Doordarshan, the national broadcaster of India. It has decided to not broadcast both the opening and the closing ceremonies. The decision was announced by the CEO of Prasar Bharati. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister of Pakistan has landed in Beijing. He will be attending the opening ceremony of the Games, as will the Russian President, along with 30 other heads of state and international bodies. We hope they are taking all precautions because the Wuhan virus has breached Beijing's Olympic bubble. Personnel working for the Games are getting infected. New cases are being reported daily. On Tuesday, 32 cases were recorded, and on Wednesday, a total of 55 fresh infections were added. Athletes, staff members, organizers, they are all falling sick. How many cases are there in all? Reports say since the 23rd of January, 287 positive tests have been reported, 287 cases linked to the Winter Olympics. It's not a small figure, and chances are it is likely to grow in the days ahead. Are the organizers worried? Not one bit. Look at this headline. The chief of the International Olympic Committee has said that everything is in place for a safe and successful Winter Olympics. He has also said that these games will take the scale of the winter sports forever. The statement does not inspire much confidence. 60,000 people from around the world will be attending the Winter Games. 60,000 people. China plans to test all 60,000 daily. But given how the virus has already breached that bubble, there is a reason to doubt if China's measures will work. For all we know, these games could become a super spreader event. And yet, there is little outrage. The only protests we are seeing are by Tibetans living in exile. Look at these visuals. They come from Dharamshala in India, the home of the Dalai Lama. On Thursday afternoon, Tibetan activists held a demonstration against the Winter Olympics. They dressed themselves as athletes with blindfolds who were given quote-unquote genocide medals from another protester wearing a mask of Xi Jinping.
Olympic is trying to glorify what is not actually China, the brutality, the occupation, the suppression happening in Tibet and other occupied countries. We are trying to represent that here. All the athletes, they are having not the gold medal, they are going to have a genocide gold medal, the genocide silver medal, genocide bronze medals.
Now here's the thing. The Wuhan virus has breached Beijing's Olympic bubble. The genocide against Uyghurs in Xinjiang has not stopped. Tibetans are being persecuted for practicing their culture. The pro-democracy movement is being suppressed in Hong Kong, and Taiwan continues to live under the threat of a possible Chinese invasion. It is a shame that the Winter Olympic Games are still going ahead. And staying with China, in 2020, after the clashes in the Galwan Valley, India announced that 20 soldiers were killed in action. But China refused to admit losing men. Beijing now says 4 soldiers were killed, but the real number is much higher. A new investigative report claims that 38 Chinese soldiers died in Galwan Valley. Our next report telling you more.
June 15th, 2020. A brawl in the Himalayas. Better known as the Galwan Valley face-off. India immediately acknowledged casualties. 20 soldiers were killed in action. What about China? Absolute silence. It took more than 6 months for the Chinese to admit they lost men. Even then, they downplayed it. Beijing says 4 PLA soldiers were killed in action. A new report says 38 were killed. This is the report we are talking about. It was published by an Australian website, The Klaxon. How did they arrive at this number? Through a year-long investigation. Information was collected from multiple sources. Chinese bloggers, military experts, deleted media reports. All of them pointed to the same thing, a massive cover-up. So what exactly happened in the Galwan Valley? Here's what the report says. The disagreement began over a bridge made by the Indian Army. A temporary bridge over the Galwan River. It was built to monitor the PLA's activities. But China objected. On June 6th, 80 PLA soldiers came to dismantle the bridge. 100 Indian troops assembled to defend it. Discussions followed. Both sides agreed to pull back and remove all constructions. China, being China, did not keep its word. Instead of removing its own facilities, the PLA dismantled the India-built bridge. Days later, the Indian soldiers returned. The date is June 15th, the day of the brawl. 150 PLA soldiers assembled under their commander, Chi Fabao. This time China did not want talks. The report says Chi organized his soldiers into battle formation. A fight followed. When Chi attacked, he was surrounded by Indian soldiers. He sustained a head injury and was rushed back. With defeat imminent, his fellow soldiers fled. By this time, night fell. The Chinese soldiers tried to cross the icy Galwan river in pitch darkness, but they kept slipping. At least 38 PLA soldiers were washed away. Their bodies were taken to the Shikwanhe Martyrs Cemetery. But the whole thing was hushed up. The state media channels ignored it, and the few who covered it were asked to delete their reports. The propaganda was complete. The death of 38 soldiers became a footnote in China. India, though, honored its martyrs. Their names have been inscribed on the National War Memorial. In Ladakh, a special monument was built for them. This new report reveals what we already knew. Its details may not be verified, but the conclusion is indisputable. Dozens of PLA soldiers did die in the chilly heights of the Galwan Valley, and to this day, China refuses to honor them. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
America's war on terror has resumed in Syria. The target was the leader of the Islamic State, Abu Ibrahim al-Hashimi al-Qureshi. It was a successful mission. President Joe Biden gave the green light on Wednesday. On his orders, U.S. forces raided a building in northwest Syria. Al-Qureshi was boxed in. With no escape in sight, he blew himself up. President Biden called al-Qureshi's last act an act of cowardice.
But we do know that as our troops approached to capture the terrorist, in a final act of desperate cowardness, he, with no regard to the lives of his own family or others in the building, he chose to blow himself up, not just to the vest, but to blow up that third floor, rather than face justice for the crimes he has committed, taking several members of his family with him, just as his predecessor did.
This is a major victory in the war on terror, A, because of the high-profile target, and B, because of the timing. Around 3 years back, the Islamic State was routed from the battlefield. They lost their final enclave in Syria. But recently, there has been a resurgence, more recruitment, more attacks. We saw one last month. On the 20th of January, ISIS terrorists attacked a prison in Syria. Inside were Islamic State detainees. The US-backed Kurdish forces were pressed into action. What followed was a 10-day standoff. Around 120 Kurdish fighters died. 374 ISIS terrorists were neutralized. The attack was a sign of the Islamic State's resurgence, something the Kurdish forces did point out.
This attack showed the necessity of finding drastic solutions for the presence of the families of mercenaries in Al-Hol camp, the camp that has become a time bomb whose safety pin was removed. It also showed the importance of spending up trying Daesh terrorists through the formation of an international court. As long as we delay finding solutions for these problems and issues, Daesh benefits.
How many terrorists does the Islamic State have? Reports say between 8,000 and 16,000. Most intel reports hint at a resurgence, so the US had to respond. On Wednesday, they did. This was the biggest US operation in Syria since 2019. The last one also targeted the Islamic State's leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. When Baghdadi died, al-Qureshi took over. He had been leading ISIS since 2019. By taking him out, the US has contained the resurgence, at least for now. According to the Americans, there were no civilian casualties from the operation, but the ground reports dispute that version. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says that 13 civilians were killed, including 4 children and 2 women. The operation was carried out around midnight. The target was a densely populated area called Atme near the Turkish border. This is how a local resident narrated that raid.
At night, around 12:30 a.m., we thought we were hearing the sound of wind, since in the afternoon it was windy. But when we got out of the house, we saw aircrafts flying over our heads, and after 10 minutes, we heard them shouting at the residents, "Give yourself up, the house is surrounded."
While it is mission accomplished for now, the US must also think about the long term. How can the ISIS be completely wiped out? You see, the war ended 3 years back, but the post-war process was not followed. Even today, thousands of families of ISIS terrorists live in Syrian and Iraqi camps. Hundreds of terrorists are still in jail. But there is no due process, no trial, no prosecution. That is what the Kurdish fighters are calling for. Expedite the trials, prosecute these terrorists and punish them. Also, the family members. Right now, they live in massive refugee camps. These camps are hotbeds of ISIS resurgence. There must be a systematic plan to deal with them. In other words, to mop up after the war. If not, the extremist ideology will continue to fester. Equally important is political stability. In the last decade, the ISIS thrived on chaos and confusion. Even today, things are not any better. The Iranian proxies attack US forces. Turkey attacks the Kurdish militants. Baghdad also has issues with the Kurds. ISIS thrives on this sort of confusion. Right now, their attacks are limited to sleeper cells. They do not have standing armies or weapons like last time, but that does not mean the fight is over. On to Britain now, which is fast losing confidence in Boris Johnson. The British Prime Minister is facing fresh calls for resignation. Reports say at least 17 of Johnson's own party men have sent out letters of no confidence. Among them is former Minister Tobias Ellwood, also Tory lawmakers Anthony Magnol and Sir Gary Streeter. Who have these MPs addressed their letters to? The chairman of the Tory backbench 1922 committee. 54 such letters trigger a vote of no confidence in the party leadership, that is Boris Johnson. We are being told 17 letters have been sent out so far, which means 37 more communications, and there could be a vote for leadership change in the party. If the total becomes 180, Johnson's exit becomes non-negotiable. Those of you following this show are aware that Boris Johnson is trapped in the Partygate scandal. In other words, trouble of his own making. The British Prime Minister partied during the lockdown. He broke the lockdown rules, and when he tried lying about it all, he was caught. And to make matters worse, the London Metropolitan Police launched an investigation into these parties. Very recently, the British Prime Minister was also caught lying about evacuating animals from Afghanistan during the fall of Kabul. The situation hit a new low when the British civil servant Sue Gray published her report. She investigated the Downing Street parties held amid the pandemic. And here's what Gray found. Some of the behavior surrounding these gatherings is difficult to justify, quote unquote. Johnson, however, is trying his best to justify his leadership, justify the need to hold on to power. In his latest speech, the Prime Minister cited the need to deliver on pandemic promises.
Mr. Speaker, it tells me that it is more vital than ever for the government of this country to get on with the job, deliver our COVID recovery plan, and that is what we are doing.
Can a leader really cling on to his or her chair? And for how long? Boris Johnson is being criticized of excessive partying, flouting lockdown rules, lying to his voters and the parliament. There is public discontent. There is loss of trust, loss of confidence. The result looks like this.
Mr. Speaker, we know this Prime Minister has no respect for decency or honesty. I can take it when it's aimed at me. But I won't accept it when he gaslights the British public.
The Prime Minister is now a dangerous distraction at home and a running joke on the international stage.
There is an open call for Boris Johnson's resignation. Tory MP Andrew Bridgen has said Johnson has lost the moral authority to lead the country. Another party member, Roger Gale, says it is time to, quote-unquote, find another leader. The question, however, is, will the current leader even agree to step down? Or does Boris Johnson believe that he can win over his party and his voters with populist policies? He has already proposed some and may not shy away from throwing in some more. Let's move to Canada now. The truckers' protest is growing in size and strength. Thousands of protesters continue to gridlock Ottawa. In some places, violence is also being reported. Reports say the protesters apparently clashed with police officers in Alberta. Meanwhile, Canada's opposition leaders want Justin Trudeau to apologize to the protesters. They say the Canadian Prime Minister needs to stop derogating their motives by calling them a fringe. Our next report gets you all the details.
The Freedom Convoy in Canada continues to grow in strength. Thousands of protesters and truckers are marching on the streets of Ottawa against the government's COVID-19 measures. In some places, they're being joined by Sikh immigrants from India. Pictures shared on social media show Sikh protesters expressing solidarity with the truckers.
I love my freedom and my liberty as much as everybody does. And I hate a government telling me what to do with force. That's all I'm here for. It's about choice, it's not about vaccines. And we are all together, we are all Canadians, we are all truckers.
These protesters are no longer just about COVID-19 restrictions. They have turned into a movement against the current leadership. A movement that is finding overwhelming support. In an online fundraiser, the protesters have managed to raise more than $10 million from their supporters. The money is meant to sustain the protests in the days ahead, but it has already come under scrutiny. The platform this money was raised on has decided to pause and review the fundraising campaign. The protesters suspect this has been done on the behest of the Canadian government. In some places, incidents of violence are also being reported. On Tuesday evening, some protesters allegedly assaulted police officers who tried breaking up a trucker blockade. The protesters, however, refuse all such claims. They say the establishment is trying to suppress their movement through misleading stories. Opposition leaders in Canada are asking Trudeau to apologize, not only for trying to suppress the truckers' protest, but also for his track record of racist behavior.
I apologize that minister is misleading Canadians. I do get very defensive of Canadians who are outside today, patriotic, peace-loving Canadians who are called misogynist and racist by the Prime Minister. So again, I will ask the Prime Minister, who may I remind this House wore blackface on more times than he can remember, apologize to the peace-loving, patriotic Canadians who are outside right now just asking to be heard. Will he speak to them?
But the Canadian Prime Minister remains unrelenting. He says he won't be intimidated, come what may. He has also called upon the vaccinated truckers to continue doing their job.
To the nearly 90% of truckers across the country who've gotten vaccinated, who continue working hard to keep us fed and keep our economy moving, thank you.
It's been more than a week since these protests began. They started in British Columbia. They've now spread to several parts of Canada. Reports say the Trudeau government is now mulling asking the Canadian military to intervene in order to put an end to this movement. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
And just like that, we are almost at the end of yet another week. A lot of you must be looking forward to wrapping up work, perhaps de-stressing over a glass of wine. Some of us like to call it adulting. The glass of wine is supposed to be good for us. But is it? Our next report gets you the answer.
Is it fine to drink a little wine while you dine? Well, it depends on who you ask. The ancient Greeks believed wine could cure fever. In the 20th century, some physicians would prescribe wine to cancer patients. They said it was more than fine. Today, when teenagers drink alcohol, we whine. When they drink wine, we say it's fine. Studies show wine as the magic potion for a healthy heart. But that's not what doctors opine. No amount of alcohol is good for the heart. That's the World Heart Federation's line. It says in 2019, over 2.4 million people died because of alcohol. That's 4.3% of the annual deaths and 12.6% of deaths in men aged 15 to 49. Wine, at the end of the day, is alcohol, and no alcohol can be fine. What it can be is carcinogenic. In 2020, 4% of cancer cases were linked to alcohol. A Lancet study says alcohol increases your risk of catching a disease. Mostly, when we hear alcohol, we automatically think whiskey, gin, and vodka. We never put wine and cancer in the same line. The reality is different. When we drink alcohol, any type of alcohol, the onus falls on our liver to process that drink. When that drink is metabolized, it becomes a substance called acetaldehyde. It is toxic and a known carcinogen. That's the link between wine/alcohol and cancer. One study equates wine to cigarettes. 1 bottle of wine per week is equal to 5 cigarettes for men, 10 for women. If all of this is true, how do we explain the French paradox? Its population consumes a lot of saturated fat and cholesterol, and yet the French have low rates of heart disease. Many believe red wine is the French secret. Sure, wine has antioxidants. They are called polyphenols. They reduce inflammation in our bodies. Red wine has 10 times more polyphenols than white wine. Scientists are not contesting this. But if you are drinking wine for health benefits, you might as well have a piece of fruit or a bowl of vegetables. Both have polyphenols, and they come with no added risk of cancer. So let's clink to the bitter truth. A glass of wine is not fine. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
With that, it's a wrap on this edition. We're leaving you as always with Gravitas images. Thanks very much for watching.